What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be doing another mock draft. After the last video, I know you guys put some things in the comments and I went through and I read all of those, so we'll be improving after last time. It is still very early, so there's a lot of prospects that I might be higher on than some of you guys. There might be some prospects that you guys are higher on than me. So today we'll go through with a new draft order, and we'll see some teams get some new players. Starting off, though, the Bears with the first overall pick. I don't see a change here. I still think they get Caleb Williams. I still think they get the best quarterback in the class, though. I know there is some people vying for Drake May for number one, but I think Chicago already having a system in place, which could obviously change with a running quarterback. I think it might work out for a guy like Caleb Williams, though. He's not going to run as much as Justin Fields. He's still an improviser. So with the number 2 overall pick, New England here finally gets their quarterback in Drake May with the number 2 pick. They're officially bad enough now where they control their own destiny to get one of the top 2 guys, maybe get the first guy. I don't know if they're as bad as Carolina. I don't know if Carolina is going to win another game this year, but both of those teams, the bottom of the barrel right now. And Arizona here with their first of their 2 first-round picks. I think they're going to go with Marvin Harrison here, arguably the best player in this class, one of the best wide receiver prospects that we have seen in a long time. I would say since Jamar Chase, and both of those guys elite prospects in their own right. I'm not really going to compare the two because I think they're completely different prospects. Obviously both receivers, but they do different things. So still one of the best wide receiver prospects in a long time. Next up, the Commanders here. They need some help on the edge. They need some help on the offense, but I am going to give them the first defensive player off the board here. I know it may seem a little bit early, but Dallas Turner has been fantastic for Alabama, especially in the past few games, especially in that SEC championship. And with them in the playoffs now, with all these eyes on them, even though there was a lot before, if he goes out and performs in the playoffs, I think he could easily be a top 5 pick, if not the first defensive player off the board just in general. I think between a guy like him and a guy like Jared Verse, who I've highlighted before, I still think Jared Verse is a very good player. We'll see him go pretty high here, but I think Dallas Turner has officially overtaken him as of right now. I just think he's a little bit more versatile, and maybe that's because the Florida State defense was just so good in general. Maybe Jared Verse just didn't get as many opportunities, but Dallas Turner has been fantastic, and I know it might seem a little bit high, but I think once we get closer to the actual draft, a team like Washington who needs help on the edge, I wouldn't be surprised if they go with a guy like Dallas Turner. And the Bears here, they have the 5th overall pick. They do need some help. I don't think you address the D-line here. I just think it's way too early to do that. Johnny Newton, who we'll see get drafted in the first round, is just not good enough to go top 5. I do think they should go with the opposite side with the tackle. Last year trading up and getting Darnell, or trading down and getting Darnell Wright, they got back a package, and here they can get Caleb Williams, they can get Olu Fashanu, and taking Darnell Wright last year, you secure both sides, the right and the left side. One of those guys will have to move out to the opposite side, but we'll see what they do with that. It should be fine. Olu can play that left tackle position. Darnell Wright's already at the right tackle, so I think they should be fine there. Should be cornerstones of their offense for a while. And the Jets here, they're pretty happy. I think they would have taken either one of these guys. They obviously need help on that offensive line. We saw what happened with Aaron Rodgers. I don't think they go with a quarterback here, though I know there is some people saying maybe they should. I think they would be fine getting a quarterback in either free agency or even in later in this draft. You could easily draft a guy in the 2nd round and still get a guy with some pretty high upside. So I think they do go with Joe Alt here, who you could argue is the best offensive tackle in this class. I don't know. I don't think they go with a quarterback there. Next, at 7, the Giants, another team that could go with quarterback, but when we look at these quarterback prospects, guys like Jaden Daniels, guys like J.J. McCarthy, guys like Bo Nix, Michael Penix, I just really don't see a top 10 pick with any of those guys as of right now. Guys like Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, all a little bit older. J.J. McCarthy, I just don't really see it from him. Maybe if he goes out and proves it in the playoffs and he wins a national championship for Michigan, it's a different and maybe he gets his draft stock up, but I feel like if they go with a guy like J.J. McCarthy in the 7 pick here, doesn't play exactly like Daniel Jones, but it just seems like a bit of a reach, and it could hurt you long term. I do think they go with a receiver here. I think Malik Neighbors would be the pick here. I do still think it's very close with a guy like him and Rome Odunze, even Keon Coleman, but I think Malik Neighbors would fit into this Giants offense pretty well, and I feel like that would be a guy that they would go out and target probably with the need at receiver right now. Just no one really there. That's great. There is some guys that they've had come up throughout the past few years in the draft, but you really look, there is a big hole with wide receiver 1, and I think Malik Neighbors would fit in there perfectly. Next up here, the Titans at 8. Do you go with an offensive tackle? You could easily go with a guy like J.C. Latham. You could easily go with a guy like Amarius Mims, who's had some injury history. Talise Fuaga has come up as well. I think those are really your 3 only options here. Graham Barton, good. Kingsley Sotomia, good. Patrick Paul, good. Jordan Morgan, good. Troy Fatanu, also good, but I don't see them being a top 10 pick right now. I'm not as high on J.C. Latham as some other people are. I think they could go with him here, but they do need some help at the cornerback position, and I know Kool-Aid McKinstry is on the board here, but I think personally, as of right now, my number 1 cornerback in this draft overall is Cooper DeJean, and I know that might surprise some people, but he is an absolute athlete, and this guy can play pretty much every position on the defense that you need in the secondary. He can run back kicks for you. He can be a punt returner, a kick returner, whatever you need from Cooper DeJean, he can go out there, and he's also an elite level cornerback, and I know it may be surprising that he goes this high, but he is my number 1 cornerback, and I know Kool-Aid McKinstry is a very good player in his own right, but I just see a little bit more versatility from Cooper DeJean. That might change towards the end of this draft. We're only in December right now, so we still have 4 to 5 more months before we really get a picture of what's actually going to happen. But as of right now, Cooper DeJean in the 8 pick. Next up here, the Saints, they also need some help on their offensive line. They need some help on the defensive line too. They could use some help on the edge, and I think they're going to get it here with Jared Verse. Like I said before, Jared Verse hasn't really produced as much as we would hope this year statistically, just because that defense is so good, and I just think he hasn't really had as many opportunities as a guy like Dallas Turner. Dallas Turner has been fantastic so far, but Jared Verse, still one of the best players in this draft. I wouldn't be surprised if he could even get his draft stock back up. He seems like a guy that may not have the most on film, but a team may maybe reach on him in a sense because they believe in him. He could be a guy that easily develops more in the NFL than he did in college, and he just really didn't have as much of an opportunity. He did have some good opportunities this year, but statistically, compared to a guy like Dallas Turner, it's just hard not to go with Dallas Turner first, but still a top 10 pick. I don't think he would be mad. And Tampa Bay here, we're still in that situation where they could go with a quarterback here, and I think they easily could, but I just don't really see, like I said before, I don't see a quarterback going this high yet at the 10th overall pick. Baker Mayfield has been good enough. He's been a little better than serviceable, so they've been in a position where they've been able to win some games. Obviously, they haven't been that great, but with the 10th overall pick going into this year, they didn't really know who their quarterback would be. I think they expected to be a lot worse than they are, and obviously they're not that great this year, but they've had a somewhat successful season. I think they go with a wide receiver, and I think they go with Rome Odunze here. He has been fantastic, 215, 6'3". He's going to run probably a 4.3-ish area. He's a fast guy, and I think he could go here in the top 10. I know some people may be a little bit higher on a guy like Keon Coleman, but I don't know. I just think that Rome Odunze is going to perform, and especially once we get to the actual draft time, once we get through and see everything before that, the build-up, the 40 times, everything in the combine, I think Rome Odunze will be able to separate himself as potentially wide receiver number 2 in this draft. I know I had Malik Neighbors going earlier, but I still think Rome Odunze could be that number 2. I think it easily right now between both of those guys, especially for Rome Odunze, he's going to be playing in the playoffs. Malik Neighbors isn't, so still some more time to be able to improve and show people that he is that guy. Next up here, the Raiders. Now, this is the first spot that I would consider a quarterback, but the Raiders last year had the opportunity to draft a quarterback, and they didn't. And I think they kind of stick with that here. I know they need some help throughout pretty much the whole entire team. They do have some big holes on this team, and I think they are going to go with Latu here. They need some help on that edge, and I think they're willing to take a risk on a little bit of an older guy who maybe, like we said before, has had some injury history. Maybe it won't show up after the combine. If he's completely healthy, I think he could go a lot higher. But as of right now, we don't really know exactly what's going to happen. He did have to medically retire, as we know. So that does take down your draft stock a little bit. Still a top 11 pick here, so I wouldn't be mad about that. Next up, the Chargers with the 12th pick. I think it's pretty easy here. They need a tight end. They need some more help offensively. They're going to take Brock Bowers. Last year, they took Quentin Johnston in the first round. It hasn't really worked out so far. I still think he could be a good wide receiver, but they drafted a wide receiver that pretty much fits the mold of all their receivers that they have right now. Brock Bowers is a generational talent, and I think they would be very happy if he slipped here to the 12th overall pick, arguably the best talented player in this draft overall, and he's still pretty close to my number one player in this draft. I think there's a big gap between maybe the top 3 or 4, and then after that you can make an argument, but he reminds me a lot of a guy like Bijan Robinson last year, where he may not be a wide receiver, he may not be a quarterback, offensive lineman, edge, where pretty much any team would be willing to take one of those guys with the first overall pick. Tight end, it's very hard to convince a team to draft a tight end with a high overall pick just because the nature of the position, but I still think he could easily go in even the top 5. He's that talented. I just don't really see it now. Washington, the only contender to get him. So after that, Cincinnati is here with the 13th overall pick. Just had to go back and redo those picks. I don't know how it backed out, but here with the 13th overall pick, the Bengals obviously in a position that they didn't hope to be in at this point. Joe Burrow looks like he's done for the year, and they've just been on the losing end of injuries so far this year. They've had some big problems with that, and they're drafting higher than they expected, so they're in a position where they could go with a few different areas. Looking at this team overall, they do need some help in a few different positions depending on where you look. Maybe offensive line, tight end, cornerback. There's a lot of different places to go, and I would say as of right now, they have built up this offensive line, but I still think they could use some help. J.C. Latham could be an option, but I do think when you look at this team right now, the Bengals depth chart, I think they need some more help in the cornerback position. Obviously, throughout these past few years, it's been tough. And if we look at the cornerbacks right now, guys like Mike Hilton, Awuzie, both good. DJ Turner, young, but I still think they could use a little bit of help. Kool-Aid McKinstry is here with a 13th overall pick. I think that would be a fantastic pick for them here. It would help them out a lot in that cornerback area. Some older guys, some younger guys, and he's fallen down here. Still one of the best players in the draft, so a bit of a steal with a 13th overall pick here. And Buffalo here, they look at this board and they see a guy like Keon Coleman. I think they're easily willing to take a guy like that with the Stephon Diggs drama that they've had throughout the past few years. Is he going to stay? Is he going to request a trade? They don't really know what's going to go on with him. So I think even if he does stay, they still do need some help in that wide receiver room. Keon Coleman, one of the best wide receivers in this class. I think they're easily willing to take a guy like that with the 14th overall pick, helping out Josh Allen in any way that they can. Next up here, Denver. They need some help on the edge, and though there is some guys that have come off the board already, I think Chop Robinson is the pick here. I'm a lot higher on Chop Robinson than some people maybe are. Some people think he's one of the best edges in the class. Some people may even have him as the 4th or 5th guy. I think he's right in the middle. I think he's the 3rd best guy. I think there is a little bit of a drop-off between a guy like Latu, or I guess the 4th edge. I think there's a bit of a drop between a guy like Jared Verse, Dallas Turner, Latu, and then I think it's Chop Robinson. I think those guys are kind of the S tier, and then Chop Robinson still within the A tier, still one of the best edges in this class, but just a little tier down. And I still think Denver would love to have him on this team here. They need some help on that edge, and I think that would fit perfectly for them. And here, Seattle, they also need some help on the edge. I just don't really see them going with a guy like Braylon Trice here. I think a little bit of a reach here. They have him listed as 23. He's pretty close to that on my big board. He's around that 25 to 30 area as of right now. I just don't think with this edge class he really stands out as much as a guy like Chop Robinson. I have him at my 29th spot, so 16 a little bit high. It would be cool to see him stay within the Washington area, but I don't think they reach here. They do need some help on the defensive line, though, and I do think that they could take a guy like Johnny Newton, Drazon Newton from Illinois. He's been fantastic. Before the season, one of the guys that I highlighted as a guy that could easily rise up a bunch of draft boards, and they take him here, a fantastic pick that will help them out. Next up here, the Rams. They have actually been outplaying their expectations this year. They've had some pretty good games. They were playing a lot better during the beginning of the season. They've had some injuries. Puka Nacua has come out and played fantastic for them. One of the best rookies in this class overall. If CJ Stroud wasn't playing as well as he was, I think Puka could easily run away with that award, but CJ Stroud, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL as of right now in his rookie year. So they do have to go with an opposite direction here. They do need some help in a bunch of different areas, but J.C. Latham has dropped, and I think there's no reason that he should go farther than this. I think he's more in this 17-ish area. I think there's a little bit of a drop-off between the rest of the offensive tackles that we've seen and a guy like him. I actually have him at 17th on my big board, so perfect here. He can go 17th to the Rams. Next up here, the Cardinals. They got Marvin Harrison earlier. I think they address the cornerback position, and Nate Wiggins is here. I think that'd be a great fit for them. They need some help there, so end up going with an offensive and defensive player. I know some people may not like that, and they may think it's a little bit gimmicky, but you have a first round pick earlier in the draft. You have one here at 18. You might as well go with both sides of the ball if it presents itself to you. Next up here, the Falcons, though. This is an interesting spot because I think this is really the first part of the draft where I would feel confident with a team drafting a quarterback with a 19th overall pick between these guys and feel like maybe that's a good decision. I think they've officially removed Shedeur Sanders off of here, which makes sense, so we're not going to go with him here. I think he's going to stay in college, so we're going to go with a different option. I think with the guys left on this board, the guy with potentially the highest upside, though he may win the Heisman, we don't really know yet what's going to happen. Some people arguing that he should, some people maybe arguing that he shouldn't. I think Jaden Daniels probably the third best quarterback in this draft, right after Drake May and Caleb Williams. And I think with this 19th overall pick, Atlanta could go with him and not feel like they invested too much. Obviously still a first round pick, not a top 10 pick, not even a top 15 pick, a top 20 pick. So I think he could go in there with maybe not as high expectations as someone earlier in this draft, but I still think he could easily thrive in this system. He's one of those guys that we've seen has been able to become a playmaker, and with the quarterbacks that Atlanta's had, they've had a very diverse history of quarterbacks, obviously having guys like Michael Vick and even a guy like Matt Ryan playing completely different styles of football. Matt Ryan winning the MVP for them. So they do have a good development of quarterbacks. Desmond Ridder, I don't think is the answer, but he's a guy that could be serviceable enough that Jaden Daniels wouldn't necessarily have to start day one, and he could still sit behind them and have to come in when he needs to. But he could go out there and start day one, so we could see what happens with that. I think an interesting storyline here in Atlanta with taking Jaden Daniels here. With the 20th overall pick here, the Packers, they do need some help here on the offensive line, but I do think they also need some help in the wide receiver area. Is this the year that they finally take a wide receiver in the first round? I think with the way that this wide receiver room has looked, I think you do. Emeka Egbuka has been a guy that has dropped down some people's draft boards throughout this process. I still think he's a very solid receiver. He's not in that tier of the other guys that I mentioned before that have been drafted, guys like Roma Dunze, even guys like Keon Coleman. I think Egbuka is the tier right below that. This is kind of where that starts, but still has been fantastic. And obviously when you're behind a guy like Marvin Harrison who's up for the Heisman, your stats aren't going to look as good as if you were a number one guy on another team, but he is still proven enough to be a first round pick, even a top 20 pick. And next here, the Vikings. Another team that could go with quarterback here, I think another interesting scenario where they could go with a guy like J.J. McCarthy that could fit into their offense. We don't know what's going to happen with Kirk Cousins, and I do think they go with quarterback here, but I don't take J.J. McCarthy. I think they're going to go with Michael Penix here. I know, a little bit of a surprise there. No Bo Nix, no J.J. McCarthy, but I think Minnesota is willing to take a risk on a guy like Michael Penix. It just seems like the fit with him there compared to a guy like Bo Nix or J.J. McCarthy. Michael Penix can sling the ball. He can also run, and putting him in that offense with Justin Jefferson, I just feel like him going into that offense that they already have is just more intriguing than the other two guys, and I think he could easily go out there and prove that he is the best out of those three, even could prove that he's a better quarterback prospect than a guy like Jaden Daniels. We'll have to see what happens if Washington goes out there and performs and he wins the national championship. He could easily go a lot higher than this, but for now, we're going to have him go with the 21st overall pick to Minnesota. The Colts here, I think they would have liked if they were a lot higher in this draft. Obviously, the storyline, if they could have got Marvin Harrison, going back to where Marvin Harrison Jr., going to where his dad played in Indianapolis. Maybe we'll see that at some point in the NFL, but you're definitely not going to get him with a 22nd overall pick. Now, though, they do need some help with the wide receiver area. They could easily target that. I don't know if anyone necessarily should go with this 22nd overall pick. We're going to go to the defensive end here, and there's a bunch of different guys here for the cornerback position, but I'm going to stick with one of my favorite prospects as of right now, Kamari Lassiter for Georgia. He's been fantastic, and I think that would fit very well for this Indianapolis team. And now we see a team in Pittsburgh that needs some help in the cornerback position. They probably would have liked a guy like Kamari Lassiter on their team, but they just missed out on him. I still think they do go with the cornerback position, and though Kalen King would make a very interesting storyline, obviously getting Joey Porter last year, keeping him within the state, I think Terrion Arnold may be the better prospect at this point in the draft, and I think that would definitely help this team out a lot. They need some help at the cornerback position. Even though they went with one pretty high last year, they could still use some help there, and I don't think it's ever a bad decision to draft a cornerback, especially with the lifespan that we've seen in the past few years. We've had some players play fantastic and then drop off very quickly at that cornerback position, so I think it's always good to be able to draft a cornerback, especially with a 23rd overall pick. If they're good, then obviously that helps out, but it's not as high of a risk as taking a guy in the top 10. And next here, the Texans. They've been great, but they do need some help in that wide receiver room. I think drafting a guy last year like Tank Dell has obviously helped them a lot. They still do need a lot of help. And between the options here, a guy like Xavier Worthy would be intriguing. I think they're going to go with A.D. Mitchell here from Texas. He was great at Georgia before he transferred, but he's a guy that a little bit bigger than the rest of these guys. He can go up and catch the ball at a high point. I mean, he has been fantastic for Texas. We're going to see how they do in the playoffs. Another guy on this list that continues to build his resume. At 6'4", he can get pretty much every ball that you throw up to him, having some of the biggest catches in Georgia's recent history throughout the past few years, and has been great at Texas. The Chiefs here with a 25th pick, a little bit of a drop-off here, not even in the NFC, AFC championship area, that 29 through 32. So we'll see what they're projected at the end of the year, but drafting a little higher than before. They also need some help on the offensive end, potentially in the wide receiver room, but I do think they would rather go with a tackle to protect Patrick Mahomes. They have needed some help on that offensive line the past few years. They have gone out and done some trades to patch it up, but I think you kind of rebuild a little bit here. You take Talise Fuaga, and he's been great. He's risen up a lot of people's boards, and I think the Chiefs here could use a receiver. I think they could wait and go with any of these guys in the next round, and they would be fine. You could easily get a guy like Johnny Wilson, Ladd McConkey, even Jalen Polk, whoever is left here in the next round, and be completely fine with that. Jacksonville here in the first round with a 26th overall pick. They also need some help in a lot of different departments on the offense. The wide receiver room could use a little bit of help. I think it's a little too early for a running back. I do think that a guy like Trayvon Henderson, even Trey Benson, could sneak into that second round. I don't think the first round. I think a little bit too early there, but we're going to go with the opposite end. I think they need a little bit of help on the defense. I think Cameron Kinchens could go here. They have him listed as 33rd best prospect. I think he's a little bit higher than that at the safety position. I know that some teams may be a little bit hesitant to draft a safety that high position-wise. It just seems like safeties don't go as high as a position like a cornerback, which makes sense, but I think Jacksonville could easily get a guy like Kinchens, who has been great. He's been able to be versatile as well, and that would help them out a lot. Dallas here, they have a bunch of different options to go with. I think they do need some help. Their offensive line has been great historically the past 10, 20 years, but it is getting older. I think they go with Amarius Mims here. He's fallen down a little bit just due to some injury history throughout the past few months and this season, but I don't think he falls any farther than this. Detroit needs some help on their defense. They need some help in that cornerback area. I think they go with a guy like Kalen King here. Some of these picks just flowing off pretty easily. A lot of these teams drafting the best player that's available, and in some of these instances, a team like that, Kalen King's left on the board, you might as well take him. You need some help in your cornerback room. Jeff Okudah the past few years obviously hasn't panned out like they hope he would with that top 5 pick. And that's the risk going with a cornerback in the top 5. I think they feel a little bit more confident in a guy like Kalen King, drafting him 28th. You don't have to worry about the fall off as much just because he's not going to be in the top 5. The San Francisco 49ers here, they start our last 4 picks. They need some help on the offensive line, though it's only really because Trent Williams is getting a little bit older. He's 35 now. He's had some injuries this year. I think you come in here and you get a guy like Patrick Paul. I think Graham Barton may be a little bit better of a prospect, but Patrick Paul, in my opinion, just fits this offense a little bit better. I know, like I said before, their offense getting a little bit older, but Patrick Paul at 6'7" would be perfect to fit in there for Trent Williams, who's getting older. At 35 years old, he's had some injuries this year. You got to replace him at some point. He's still one of the best players in the NFL, but you need to replace him. He's 35. He's going to end up not in the NFL within the next half decade just because he's so old. So I think you go with Patrick Paul at 6'7", replace him there. Though Graham Barton may be a little bit better of a prospect. I just think that fits better for them. The Ravens here with the 30th overall pick in the first round. They need some help on the cornerback side of the defense. I think they're going to go with Denzel Burke here. He's the best available cornerback according to this board. I think they could, even a guy like TJ Tampa, who they have at 78, I think he could sneak into this first round. Even a guy like Chris Drain could sneak into the first round. Josh Newton could sneak into the first round. But as of right now, I think Denzel Burke has proven that he's the best out of these guys, and I think that's the pick for Baltimore right now. Last year going with Zay Flowers in the first round. He's been great. Hopefully they can get another great guy here in the first round. The Dolphins, they have been fantastic this year. I mean, their offense is one of the best in the NFL that we have seen. They need some help in the tight end area. Jatavion Sanders, I don't think is a first-round talent. I do think he is a second-round talent, though. I think he should go within there. After that, if we look at the tight ends, I think Cade Stover, Jaheim Bell, I mean, you can make an argument that any of these guys may be a third or fourth-round pick, but after Jatavion Sanders, I don't see a tight end going for a while. So I think they do go, they do look here with their options, and I think they do go with Graham Barton here. They need some help in that offensive tackle area. They also need some help in the interior of the offensive line, and Graham Barton can move out and pretty much play any position that you need him to on the offensive line. Versatile guy, and that would be perfect for them. Even though their offense has been great, they still do need some help in the trenches. And the Eagles here having the last pick in the first round. Like we say pretty much every year, a bit of a luxury pick. You can go with pretty much anyone, and even if they don't pan out, it doesn't really hurt you too much just because it's the end of the first round. And if it does help you, then obviously that's great for you. The last pick here, though, in the first round, they do need some help on the defense. I am going to look potentially maybe at a cornerback here, but like we just said, maybe kind of stick away from that. I think they are going to go with the edge here. Braylon Trice, just too good to not pick here. and he's going to be the last pick of the first round here. As we go through and look through this draft, we had a few different quarterbacks go in the first round, Caleb Williams and Drake May back to back, and then obviously highlighted by some offensive tackles, and the edges come off of the board, the receivers come off of the board, a lot of cornerbacks in this first round, a lot of edges, tackles, and cornerbacks, receivers pretty much. I think cornerback, one of the best overall position groups in this year's draft. That edge and tackle are all very strong, wide receiver as well. I do, like I've said pretty much every time we do a mock draft, I think this will go down as one of the best draft classes in NFL history. I have some pretty high hopes for all of these players, and a few things have changed since last time in this mock draft. A few different teams getting a few different players, so let me know down below, did your team get a player that you thought they should? Do you think they should have gone with someone else? Let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next one. If there's any other kind of ideas that you want me to do specifically within this draft, maybe offensive players only, defensive players only, let me know down below, and I'll see you then.